We're getting deeper into the life of the prophet Elisha, and you might remember that Elisha has taken Elijah's place. He's carrying Elijah's mantle, and he's confirmed it through several miracles already. But today, Elisha enters the political situation. Now, this morning I mentioned a little bit about how tonight's passage, we talked about people who, they're not paying attention to the Lord. They don't really care about Him. They're not really in His Word or going to church or any of those types of things. But then when something really bad happens, the foxhole prayer, right? Then they care about the Lord. They'll ignore God and they'll ignore godly counsel and they'll ignore all these things. And then at the last minute when everything's falling apart, it's like, oh, now I care what God says. Now we can look at that and be frustrated. You get frustrated with that a little bit? It's easy to get a little frustrated with that a little bit. It is. And yet, we've probably all been guilty of that at some level here and there as well. Something like that happens in today's passage. Now, Israel and Judah are two nations heading in completely different directions. We saw kind of where we are in the political scene. Israel's up here in the north, and Judah is in the south. Judah's being ruled by the kings of David. And in general, Judah's been worshiping the Lord. But up here in the north, Israel has seen all types of turmoil, all types of instability. Ahab and his evil wife, Jezebel. We'd have to go back a little bit here on the left side of this chart. Let's go here. Ahab and his evil wife, Jezebel, ruled for about 20 years. And Ahab, what happened to Ahab? What happened? What's that? He died. He's dead. Okay. What happened to Jezebel at this point in history? It's been a little while. She's still around. And so Ahab is dead, but Jezebel remains. And so Ahaziah becomes king, and he dies, but Jezebel remains. And now Joram is the king. And, Ahaziah doesn't have any sons. Ahaziah is a son of Ahab. He has no sons. He dies, and so another son of Ahab comes. So Joram, his parents, it seems to be are Ahab, or at least Ahab, and it seems to be Jezebel. Jehoram, now we have here Joram, but he also goes by Jehoram. Jehoram is evil. He's an evil king, just like his father. And so things are not good. Things are not good in... Oh, man. How do I stop that? I never know how to stop this. I'll just do it that way. I have to figure that out at some point. But it's like sometimes I press buttons and it works, and sometimes I press buttons and it doesn't work. So I really don't know what I'm doing. I just press random buttons. Well, anyway, things aren't good up there in the north, but God continues to work through His prophets, and He's going to continue to work through His prophets in today's passage in 2 Kings 3. 2 Kings 3, not 2. Now, Jehoram, the son of Ahab, now on our chart it said Joram, but again, Joram and Jehoram are the same, it's the same person in Israel. And there's another Joram and Jehoram in Judah at the same time, so don't get confused about those two different guys. Now Jehoram, the son of Ahab, which is different than the guy in Judah, Jehoram, the son of Ahab, became king over Israel at Samaria in the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and he reigned 12 years. If we pull up our chart, we're going to count from 870. That's the year that Jehoshaphat, on the right side, Jehoshaphat's in yellow there. Jehoshaphat begins his rule in 873, but remember, he ruled alongside of his father for 3 of those years. It wasn't until 870, when Asa dies, that we're counting the years from these kings in the north. So just be aware that that's not a contradiction in the Bible or anything like that. But we're going to say about 852 or so, Joram becomes king. So he becomes king over Israel and Samaria in the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and he reigned 12 years. So we have about 852 to 841, and these numbers aren't exact, and these numbers aren't perfect. We could be off by a year or two or something like that, but we're going to say 852 to 841. Notice, what we have a lot of times is we have the beginning of a king's rule. You might remember the pattern we saw as we went through Kings, First Kings. The beginning of his rule, and then the good or evil of his rule. That's something we saw a lot. It's a formula that we saw over and over. Jehoram did evil in the sight of the Lord. He didn't do good, he did evil. And it's important to remember that he did evil in the sight of the Lord throughout this passage. Even though, listen, he was bad, but he wasn't as bad as, some other people. Like he wasn't as bad as here, his father and his mother. Well, you might think, okay, that's something. It's something. But remember what the Bible said about Ahab and Jezebel? Anyone remember what it said about Ahab? He was the worst. He was the worst guy that has ruled up to his time, and he's the worst one that's right. So, when you're being compared against the very worst, I guess if you want to take that as a positive, I guess you could take it as a positive, but it's not really, to me, the fact that I'm being compared, listen, he was evil, not quite like the worst guy that's ever existed, you know what I mean, but he was bad. And that sounds like something Trump would say, right? He did evil in the sight of the Lord, though not like his father and his mother, for he put away the sacred pillar of Baal, which his father had made. So that's kind of important. So he was evil just like all the kings of Israel, not as bad as Ahab and Jezebel, but he puts away this sacred pillar of Baal that Ahab had made in Samaria, an altar to Baal that Ahab had made in Samaria back in 1 Kings 16. So there's something good there. He takes that idolatrous altar away. Nevertheless, he clung, he held on to the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel sin. He did not depart from them. So he continues to worship at the altars in Dan and Bethel. He continues to follow this cult, this kind of syncretistic cult, this cult that looks like it's serving the Lord, but it's really not. Think about this. It's like these guys set up their own priests. They set up their own temples. They set up their own little thing here. And so it's really, they're not really worshiping the Lord. They're worshiping a version of the Lord that they've created. And they even have images of the Lord, in the images of golden calves that they set up. These are your gods, O Israel. So it is a cult. It really is a cult. It really is a bad, it's not godly. So understand that. If you follow after the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, you're following after a cult. It's a cult that claims to be worshiping the Lord, but it's not really doing that. That's Jehoram. Well, anyway, during his reign, the king of Moab rebels against him. Now, we took a couple weeks off at the end of 1 Kings to study a few passages about Jehoshaphat in Chronicles, and we looked at a king of Moab in the life of Jehoshaphat already. Does anyone remember, or maybe they took a note, the king of Moab? Anyone remember his name? Tom. What's that? I can't really hear you. Oh, Eglon. You're thinking of a guy in the Judges. I think that was a fat man, and if I remember. And I think Ehud, who was ambidextrous, the Bible says left-handed, but it means hindered in his right hand. Ehud shoved a blade into his belly, and the stuff came out. So, but that's he was ruling. I don't remember if that was a king of Moab in the Judges, but it's not this king. But he was definitely an oppressive king from that general region. I just can't remember if it was Moab or Ammon or whatever. Go ahead, Abby. It's Misha. It's Misha. That's Ahaziah would have been a king of. He would have been a king of Israel, Judah. So Misha, you had it.
I said start with an M, but I just couldn't remember.
Well, starting with an M, I don't know if that really counts. Like would that? In Jeopardy, would you get the point? It starts with an M. You know, anyway, let's take a. Oh, and what do we know about? I'm just messing. Sabrina's the best. She really is. How do we know? Where have we read about Misha outside of the Bible? Does anyone remember the name of the thing? The thing that was found that his exploits were written on? The Moabite stone or stele or the Misha inscription or whatever else. We talked about that. It's been a few weeks. We've talked. It's fine. Those are like Bible trivia for 2000, Abby. Those are like, it's not even really. It's extra biblical trivia. So verse 4. Now Misha, king of Moab, was a goat herder. Okay, he was a sheep breeder, and he used to pay the king of Israel 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. He paid tribute. He paid tax. He paid so that he could have a certain level of independence. As long as I'm paying my money to the king of Israel, he leaves me alone. And so that's basically what it is. If I don't pay, he's going to come, he's going to invade, and this is a heavy tax. This is a tax that he no longer wants to pay. Now, if you look at where Moab is, Moab, on our map, you have Israel up here in the north, you have Judah in the south. One of the main enemies of Israel at the time is Syria up in the northeast. Well, you kind of come down south of Syria is Ammon. You have some of this Transjordan area that belongs to Israel, the land of Gilead and that land. And then beneath that, between essentially Ammon and Edom, is Moab, which is part of Jordan today. And so is Edom. Edom is part of Jordan. Actually, I put on the movie Dune Part 1 last night with the kids, and I'm looking and I said, man, that looks like Jordan down by Petra. I wonder if that's, and I looked it up, where was Dune filmed? And it was filmed Jordan down by, they just added the sand, because the sand's not there in real life. Like the mountains look like, but the sand wasn't there. They just added the CGI sand or whatever else. But it's all like, if you've watched the movie Dune, take the sand out, not the original, the new one. Take the sand out of it and look at the mountains, and that's what this area looks like. I mean, it's more, that's down in this area more. But, there's nothing there. It's kind of useless land. You might have all this land, but there's not a whole lot of value outside of where a couple of these rivers are. There's really not a ton of value to that land. Well, Moab is over here on the other side of the Dead Sea, and it doesn't have a whole lot of resources, and he's given up 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. And when Ahab dies, he says, you know what, I'm just not going to pay anymore. I'm not paying this tax anymore. I mean, look, Ahab got smoked. Ahab got smoked by the king of Syria. And if Israel got smoked that bad in battle up there, then you know what? I'm not paying. I'm not paying. Because they can't offer me the protection, and I don't believe they're going to come against me. I'm not. And Moab is increasing in strength. And so in this situation where Moab is increasing in strength, where Israel's strength has begun to be depleted, and the king of Moab stops giving money to the king of Israel, war is inevitable. War is inevitable. And so Jehoram, who is the king of Israel in the north, Jehoram goes out and gathers an army to fight against Moab in verses 5 and 6. So check this out. But when Ahab died, the king of Moab, Misha, the king of Moab, rebelled against the king of Israel, and King Jehoram went out of Samaria at that time. And Samaria, what's the significance of Samaria? Why is Samaria important? First off, what is Samaria? What type of place is Samaria? Is it a region, a mountain, a river, a city? In this context, go ahead. It is a city, and it's the capital city. Sometimes the entire nation of the north is called Samaria. But here he goes out of the city of Samaria at that time, and he musters all Israel. Not only does he gather an army of the people of Israel, and by the way, if we were to kind of come in on the map of Israel and we were to zoom in, and you have kind of a line between the southern tip of the Sea of Galilee and the northern tip of the Dead Sea, and you go about halfway up, and you go about halfway between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. X marks the spot. That is Samaria. All right, that's right in the heartland of Israel. So he gathers up this army, and he wants to go to war, and he gathers up an ally. Then he went and sent word to Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, saying, "The king of Moab has rebelled against me. Will you go with me to fight against Moab?" Now, what do we remember about Jehoshaphat and his relationship with Israel? What do we remember about Jehoshaphat's relationship with Israel? Brittany. They're married. He married into the house, right? They're in-laws. They're in-laws at some level. So, I mean, that's not good. That's not good. And he continues to go and be allies. He was allies with Ahab. Wouldn't you think he'd learn his lesson to go fight with these people? He went and fought alongside of Ahab, and Ahab's like, hey, listen, why don't you put on the king garment? Because they want to kill me. You dress up like a king, and I won't. And Ahab's like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. Okay. It's like, hello, McFly. No. Well, anyway, so here, it's like, did you learn your lesson? Will you go up with me and fight? Ahab says, and Jehoshaphat says, yes, I'll go up your armies. My armies are like your armies. So now Joram says, will you go up and fight? And a light bulb goes off in Jehoshaphat's mind. Like, ding, 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 ding. I've heard this before. I've heard these words before. I did it before. And I almost got killed. So the obvious answer is the exact same answer I gave his father. I will go up. Hello? He said, I will go up. I am as you are. My people as your people. My horses as your horses. Now, I don't like this at all. I don't like this at all. I kind of feel like Jehoshaphat should have learned his lesson. I kind of feel like when Jehoshaphat was screaming for his life, crying out as he's running away from the armies of Syria, that he might remember that and not make the same mistake. Right? Would anyone else maybe feel that way? Are you with me? Who's with me here? I think we all see this the same way here. Now, again, hindsight is 20/20, right? So but whatever, we don't know all the context of it. We don't know. This is what I know. I ain't touching the Israelite army in an ally relationship with a 39.5-foot pole. I'm not going near that house of Omri at this point, because judgment is coming. But he does it. He should know better than to join with evil people, but he does it anyway, and he does it wholeheartedly. He says, I am as you are. Like, we're one. He's like, Israel is with me, and I am one with Israel. You know what I mean? He's your people are your horses are as my horses, and he uses the exact same terminology that he used with Jehoshaphat when Ahab says, will you go with me to battle at Ramoth Gilead? And Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, I am as you are. My people as your people, my horses as your horses. We've already been here, we've already done it. Exact same answer. You got to shake your head sometimes in disbelief. Now, you might remember that when Ahab asked him to go to battle, you might remember that Jehoshaphat wanted to hear from a prophet of the Lord. Remember? And you remember Ahab pulls out his prophets, and they all prophesy of victory, and Jehoshaphat's kind of like, no, this is pretty sketchy. Do you not have a prophet of the Lord here? And they're like, yeah, we do have a guy, but I hate him. Remember that? And they live, remember anyone, I'm going to say Bible trivia for 600. I'm going to say 600 on this. Maybe I'm giving it too high of a number. Who's the prophet? Anyone remember who that prophet was? Micaiah. 600 was too high, wasn't it? That was too high. All right. I'm questioning my scale. I got to bring my scale back down to, yeah, okay. Well, at least he asked for an answer. He didn't listen to the answer. This time he doesn't even ask for a prophet. This time he's just like, yeah, let's go do it. And it's not the most valuable, it's not the strongest point in Jehoshaphat's life. And so the armies gather together and they develop a strategic plan of attack. In verse 8 he said, which way shall we go up? And he answered, the way of the wilderness of Edom. And if you look at a map, actually I have something a little better here to give you a feel for what, there's the Moabite stone. I meant to show you that earlier. If you have a general feel for what the situation is here. Man, I thought I had a pointer in there. Way up in the north is where they would start in Samaria. We follow that green line down to where it hits the red line. That's where they gathered together with the armies of Israel, and they decide to go all the way down the western side of the Dead Sea, and they want to pick up another ally. We'll see in a minute. And then they come up the eastern side to fight against Moab. And let me tell you something about that land. That land is kind of like this. So you're traveling with armies in what's like a wasteland. This is not exactly the best plan I've ever... And by the way, you say, they're near water. Oh yeah, they're near water, all right. The saltiest water on the face of the earth. You know what I mean? So it's like you float on that. You could get a newspaper in there and just lay back and, read the newspaper with your legs crossed. And I'm not kidding when I say it. You could legit just fall back, cross your legs, and, whatever. You read the newspaper. And you're just sitting there like you're sitting on a bed. You might kind of roll over if because you still float, but you have to kind of keep yourself balanced. But there's nothing there. You can't drink that water. There's no drinkable water here. There's no way to survive here. But they think, hey, you know what? We traveled 40 miles from Samaria down to Jericho here, the green line. Let's go another 100 miles, circuitous trip down, all the way down beneath the bottom edge of the really dead area of land down there, the southern edge of the Dead Sea and up, and we're going to surprise the Moabites, because the Moabites, they would expect us. They would expect us to come from here, but what we're going to do instead is we're going to come here, come down this way, and we're going to attack them from here. That's the idea. And maybe it's because the Moabites have the high ground, and we all know the importance of the high ground. And so they want to have a sneak attack there. But this is not a smart plan because there's no water down there. And the Moabite stone that we looked at there had said that Moab had already taken a lot of this territory, even up into the north. And so, again, they might have some good ground there to hold in battle against the Israelites. But they pick up another. They want to pick up another ally in Edom. And when they pick up that ally, after they pick up that ally, so now you have Israel. And they pick up the ally of Judah, and they pick up the ally of Edom, and they take the long route around the Dead Sea where there's no water, and guess what happens? Guess what happens to them? Guess what they run out of? Oh, man. Go ahead. They run out of water. Now, they probably start with a few days of water on them, and we're going to get some water here. They run out of water. Like a bunch of doofuses. They run out of water. That's what happens. Check it out. Verse 9. So the king of Israel went with the king of Judah and the king of Edom, and they made a circuit of 7 days after a week. And there was no water for the army or for the cattle that followed them. They start with water, they end with no water. Well, what happens if you don't have any water? And by the way, that's the desert. Hey, listen, let me tell you something. When we were down there and I went into the Dead Sea at like 9 in the morning or something like that, and it was disgusting. It was disgusting. It was so hot. You go into the Dead Sea at 9 in the morning, and it's so hot, it's disgusting because you're in like the hot desert. So they're in the spring of the year, and they're in a warm area, and it's hot, and they don't have water. And what happens when you don't have water? The people are going to die. The people are dying, right? They're going to die. Exactly. The supplies dwindle, and each day without water, they run closer and closer to death because the body can only survive, I think, about 3 or 4 days without water. And when you run out of water in the desert, there's only one thing you can drink.
Dung.
Well, you wouldn't drink dung, but it's similar. It's close. Okay, it's close. And I wouldn't want to drink it. Never have, never intend to. Okay? Well, we're with you. We're with you, buddy. None of us would ever drink it either. I mean, unless we had to. If you had to survive, I mean, what are you going to do? Well, you ever fall asleep at night? Anyone here a mouth breather? You fall asleep and your mouth open, and you find yourself going. When I couldn't breathe out of my nose for like 15 years of my life, I would lay down, and the only way I could sleep was terrible. The only way I could sleep was breathing out of my mouth. And do you breathe out of your mouth with a CPAP machine, or does that go through the nostrils? That's nostrils. Okay, good. At least there's that. You ever wake up having a stuffy nose and having breathed only out of your mouth for like hours? What's your mouth feel like? Does it feel like little needles in there? Does it feel, it's like so incredibly dry that it's like it's almost like it's disgustingly irritated, right? You know what I mean? Your mouth is a cesspool of bacteria, and now it's completely dry, and it's like hard and whatever else. Well, that starts to happen, and then even more, the exhaustion, the headaches, the fainting, perhaps even hypothermia. Israel is growing more and more desperate. Forget about winning the battle. Winning the battle, they're just trying to stay alive at this point. Forget about winning the battle. Well, the king of Israel realizes his plight. He realizes his impending doom, and he cries out in despair in verse 10. By the way, that kind of reminds me of people. Well, let's just read it. Then the king of Israel said, "Alas! Alas! Oh man, we're in trouble. Oh, for the Lord has called these 3 kings to give them into the hand of Moab. We're doomed. We're done." That's right. We're done. He sees this as judgment from the Lord. And it's only at this time that Jehoshaphat wants to hear from God. And that reminds me of the guy who doesn't follow God until eventually he's hitting rock bottom, and then he cries out in desperation. And now you care about God. Now you care about God. There are people like that. There are people like that, for sure. Like in the book of Judges, one time God says, call out to the gods that you are worshiping. Let them deliver you. Now they finally turn to the Lord. Only now, in the end. Verse 11, but Jehoshaphat said, is there not a prophet of the Lord here? Man, why didn't you start there? Why didn't you could have saved you could have started there. Is there not a prophet of the Lord here that we may inquire of the Lord by him? And one of the king of Israel's servants answered and said, and this is interesting, Elisha, the son of Shaphat, is here with us. He came. Elisha went. Who used to pour water on the hands of Elijah. Now, what I see is a foxhole prayer. Jehoshaphat said, the word of the Lord is with him. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, and the king of Edom went down to him. God was merely an afterthought up to that point, it seems. Fortunately for these three kings, Elisha's there. Now, I've thought about this a little bit. And I've thought, what's Elisha doing there? Why is Elisha there? I don't know the answer to that, but I suspect that he may be aware of what's about to happen. I suspect that the Lord had directed him at some level to be there. That's a suspicion. It's not laid out in Scripture. I don't know why he's there, but he's there. And I suspect that God obviously had something to do with that. So Elisha the prophet is there, and this is the moment that God would have Elisha step into the political scene and really kind of take up the mantle of Elijah in ministering to the kings. Notice what the prophet says to the king of Israel. And I like this. I really like this answer. I like it a lot. It's the type of thing that we all would want to say. But, typically, maybe you wouldn't typically say, but you'd want to say. Elisha just says it, so I like it. I really do like it. I think you'll like it too. Now, Elisha said to the king of Israel, what do I have to do with you? What in the world do we have to do with each other? Go to the prophets of your father and the prophets of your mother. All these years, you followed the prophets of Dan and the prophets of Bethel. All who said, go up, we're going to take Ramoth Gilead. Those guys, the guys that led Ahab, you followed those guys and not Micaiah the prophet. Go to those guys. Get your answer. See what happens. It's kind of like what we'd want to say, right? Like the fleshly part of us would really just want to say, hey, you know what? Keep doing what you do. Go get answers from the places. Go to your secular institutes and get your answer. Go to your secular counselors and get your, right? Isn't there just a part of you? You're right deep down inside that's just like, you should have been asking from the Lord all along. Just go back to the counselors you've been following that got you into this mess. You're in this mess because of what you've been doing. If you would have been following the Lord from the beginning, you wouldn't be in the mess. So I kind of like the answer. My flesh loves that answer. Who else likes that answer? Deep down inside, you do. What do I have to do with you? Go to the prophets of your father and the prophets of your mother. And the king of Israel said to him, no, for the Lord has called, Yahweh has called these three kings together to give them into the hand of Moab. Oh, it's so bad. It's so bad. Elisha said, as the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, were it not that I regard the presence of Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, I would not look at you or see you. In other words, if it wasn't for Jehoshaphat, I wouldn't even give you a word. I wouldn't even pay attention. You're dead to me, you worshiper of false gods. If it wasn't for Jehoshaphat, now I'm going to do this for Jehoshaphat, not for you who go and worship your false gods. I'm going to do it for him. Something like that. And he says, but now bring me a minstrel. And it came about when the minstrel played that the hand of the Lord came upon him. So Elisha, it seems, disdains the house of Omri. He wants nothing to do with the king of Israel. You never sought the Lord before, and now all of a sudden you're interested in what God says? He asks for an instrument to be played, and we see that happen sometimes in the Old Testament during times of open vision where an instrument was played and a message came to someone from the Lord, or sometimes a soothing presence of an instrument. But anyway, Elisha receives a message from God. In verses 16 through 19, he said, thus says the Lord, make this valley full of trenches. I want you to dig a whole bunch of trenches all over the place. Make this valley full of trenches, for thus says the Lord, you shall not see wind, nor shall you see rain, yet that valley shall be filled with water so that you shall drink, both you and your cattle and your beasts. This is but a slight thing in the sight of the Lord. This is nothing. For you, it would be impossible. For you, you could not possibly bring water here to feed, to sustain all these people and their animals. But for the Lord, it's nothing. It's tiny. He will also give the Moabites into your hand. Then you shall strike every fortified city and every choice city, and cut down every good tree, and stop all springs of water, and mar every good piece of land with stones. You'll get the water you need, not by rain, but by God's hand. Maybe it's supernatural. Maybe it's runoff from mountains, from other, whatever it is. Supernatural, like the psalmist writes, he changes a wilderness, a desert, into a pool of water, and dry land into springs of water. God will provide them all the water that they need, and he will deliver their enemies, the Moabites, into their hand. They'll destroy the land of Moab. And that's exactly what happens. Water flows to the land, into the land for the armies of Israel and Judah and Edom in verse 20. It happened in the morning, about the time of the offering of the sacrifice, somewhere around 9 in the morning or so, that behold, water came by the way of Edom. Water flowed, again, perhaps runoff from the mountains or whatever, or came from somewhere. God brought it from somewhere. We don't know how it happened, but God made it happen. The water came by the way of Edom, and the country was filled with water. Now, we press pause here for a second. We kind of move away from this scene just for a second, and we shift over to the Moabites. Now, the Moabites were gathered to go and fight against Israel and Judah and Edom. And when they get to the battlefield, what did they find? What did they see? What do you think they saw? You're going to spoil it. You know what they saw. What do you think they saw? Water? From a human perspective, reading this, we would think they saw water. But look what they see. What did they see? Tom, what do you got? Blood? Now all the Moabites heard that the kings had come up to fight against them, and all who were able to put on armor and older were summoned and stood on the border. We're all going to gather together and we're going to fight. They rose early in the morning, and the sun shone on the water that day, my friends. And the Moabites saw the water opposite them as red as blood. They saw blood. They didn't see water. You would have thought they'd see water. They saw blood. And then they said, "This is blood." The kings have surely fought together, and they have slain one another. Now, therefore, Moab, to the spoils. They think, hey, you know what happened? We've been here. We've been here, and we've done this. When we were fighting with Jehoshaphat some years earlier, we've been here and we've done it. And Moab and Edom and I think it was Ammon, if I remember, I forget who the third nation was. They were fighting, and they all turned against each other. Remember, they all turned against each other, and they killed each other. And so they say, look at this. The gods have been with us this day. You know, the Israelites and the Judahites and the Edomites, they all turned on each other, and they all killed each other, and we don't even have to fight. They all killed themselves, and now we've got all their spoils. Let's go take the stuff and get rich. That's what the idea is here. And so they go to the battle, thinking it's over. But when they came to the camp of Israel, the Israelites arose and struck the Moabites so that they fled before them. And they went forward into the land, slaughtering the Moabites. So Israel destroys Moab and destroys the cities and leaves the land desolate, just as God had said. Thus they destroyed the cities, and each one threw a stone on every piece of good land and filled it. So they stopped all the springs of water. And felled, that is, cut down all the good trees until in Kir Hareseth only they left its stones. However, the slingers went about it and struck it. They destroyed it. They decimated the land. They decimated the land of Moab. Elisha is a prophet of the Lord indeed. And now the kings of Israel and Judah and Edom understand that fact. Well, imagine being Misha, king of Moab at this point. Misha is desperate. He's desperate. He's in survival mode. He's desperate. When the king of Moab saw that the battle was too fierce for him, he took with him 700 men who drew swords. He took the 700 finest soldiers, or the nearest soldiers, to break through to the king of Edom. We're going to make one final push. But they could not. And so he gets as desperate as a king of Edom, a king of Moab could get. And he does something that's unthinkable. Then he took his eldest son. Then he took his oldest son, who was to reign in his place, and offered him as a burnt offering on the wall. I know the answer. I know the answer, he says. I'm going to kill my firstborn son. Now, for which of you would that be the answer to this trouble? Let me just go ahead and murder my kid. That'll solve the problem. But in his mind, he and the people of Moab, they would worship Chemosh, the god Chemosh, and the god Molech, and they would sacrifice their children to these false gods. They would murder their own children in the name of a god and hope that it would appease the god and the god's wrath against the Moabites. And so he killed the son as an offering. Killed his son. Notice what the passage says here. Took his oldest son, who was to reign in his place, and offered him as a burnt offering on the wall. And there came great wrath against Israel, and they departed from him and returned to their own land. Now, I can't tell you how many times I read that. And I thought, man, that's strange. You know what I mean? Because it almost sounds like the guy killed his son, and then the God stood up for them, and that's what happened. This is what's happening here. Either one, the men of Moab are so full of fury, and that's where the wrath is coming from. They're so stirred up into a frenzy by this offering that they make a final stand, and Israel is repulsed physically by what's happened. That is, they've been, it was a great battle by the Moabites. That's one possibility. They fought valiantly, being roused and stirred up by this murder of the heir apparent, because that guy's the next king. That guy's the next king. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that Israel is so disgusted, they're so disgusted by it that they walk away, and they're also facing the wrath of Moab as they're walking away. A third possibility is that they were so brutal in their attack against the Moabites that the wrath of God came upon them, and they ultimately ended up leaving the battle. Of all those options, the one that makes the most sense to me within context is the first one, is that the sacrifice of the royal son, the heir apparent, roused up the people of Moab, and they fought valiantly, and Israel had to just stop fighting. Even though they had a decisive victory, they just had to kind of stop and return to their own land. That's kind of what I'm seeing here. But understand that in this passage, that's not really the main point. in this passage, what I can't miss is the need to seek after the Lord. And most people don't do that. You go to the Lord first. When you have a problem in life, or you have something you're not sure about in life, or even if you don't have a problem in life, you go to the Lord. You want to find your answers in life, you go to the Lord. You go to the scriptures. You go to the Word, and you find you have everything. This is what Peter writes. You have everything you need for life and godliness through the true knowledge of Him. So if we want to know how do I handle this situation in life or whatever, you go to the Lord first. You don't wait until everything falls down around you and ignore what God says, and then finally, at the very last minute, turn to the Lord. Maybe in your foxhole prayer, maybe He chooses to deliver you like He did in this particular instance, or maybe He doesn't. Maybe the mess and the web of the consequences of your sin is so intricate that you can't be worked out of that God leaves you to your own devices. So, sometimes it's too late. But again, oftentimes God is gracious, and often He displays His grace and mercy. And that's what happened in this passage. I see that as a minor theme that runs along the story. I don't see that as the main theme. What I see as the main thing here is about Elisha's role. Elisha shows up in a couple of verses. To me, they're the most important verses in the entire passage. I read through the whole passage, and the thing that sticks out to me in like flashing red lights is what Elisha says, his role. And to me, in the greater portion of the narrative, I see that Elisha has entered the role of the political scene as a prophet. And other people had seen his miracles, and now these three kings, the king of Israel, and the king of Judah, and the king of Edom, know that Elisha is indeed a prophet of the Lord, and they know, if they're paying attention at all, that Elisha's God is the one true God. And He can do things that are impossible. And all the other so-called gods are idols. And all the other fake versions of the Lord, they're idolatry. The temple in Dan and the temple in Bethel, those are idolatrous places. And the idolatrous system of worship that's set up there in the north, they're idolatrous places of worship. The Lord is the one true God, and Elisha is a prophet, and the Lord demands that you worship Him exclusively and in His way, and Him alone. The Lord demands that you put Him first in your life and not wait until complete times of desperation to finally turn to Him. You guys kind of see that in there? Can you see where I didn't pull that out of a hat? You know what I mean? I'm trying the best I can to pull that out of the passage of Scripture, so that's what I have. If you're not sure you're saved, this wasn't a salvation message, but man, it sure is connected to that. If you're going to seek the Lord, you can't do that unless you get saved first. So be sure to either talk to me, or you could see Brother Metcalf on the way out, or during the invitation. We'll be happy to get you lined up with someone. If there's things, if you're in this room and you're like, you know what, man, yeah, I'm a lot like Jehoshaphat. I do stuff. I don't even think about God as I do it. I make these commitments that I really shouldn't be making. And then when I see the consequences of that come up, that's when I turn to God. If you're anything like that, then maybe this is a time where when we're singing, you get things right with God. You say, you know what, I don't want to do that anymore. From now on, I want to put God first. I want to check in with God. Not that we have access to hey, listen, hey, where do I go tomorrow? Not that way. But I'm going to check in with what God says in His truth, and I'm going to order my life around that first, so that later I'm not dealing with the consequences of my sin and putting out a foxhole prayer. If that's you, then while we're singing, you get things right with God. Stand and sing 398.